My expectations were pretty low after using the Surface Duo, and using the Galaxy Z Fold 2 actually surprised me in a lot of ways. There were a lot of things I ended up liking about the device that I was not anticipating, and I dare say it's even changed my mind a little bit on foldables. There's certain things that I haven't been convinced of, but overall that's the singular word I would use to describe the Z Fold 2. It's fun, and I want to talk more about it. Let's begin. So yeah, I've been pretty doubtful on foldables in the past. I've been negative towards them, saying that I don't really see the point, and I should probably preface this review from the beginning by saying that I think there's two different ways to look at the Z Fold 2. On one hand, you can look at it as a product today and say whether or not the price warrants the extra features you get out of it, and then you can talk about the future of foldables in general. I see everyone kind of touching on both parties, where on one hand we look at what it's become today and we say, okay, kind of expensive and maybe not worth it, but in the future maybe this will become more worth it, or in the future the prices will get better, or the features will get better, and the hardware overall in time will get much better, which is why products that necessarily don't feel like a good deal today might eventually become the next generation. So I'm going to start off today's video just by talking about the product itself, and we'll save the future talk of this is where foldables could be someday. We'll save that for later, okay? Let's just talk about the Z Fold 2 as it stands, coming out at the end of 2020. And also keep in mind, guys, this is Samsung's third foldable they've released, okay? We're coming up on the second, maybe third year of foldables now that the Z Fold 2 is going to be competing in, so I think we have to die down a little bit on the use of the it's a beta product or it's a prototype, it's the early first generation stage. Not really anymore, guys. It had its first generation prototype product that did, that kind of fell apart for a lot of people. And then they had their Z Flip, which some would argue is an entirely different thing, but I still class it as part of the Z series, because as we all know, when we look at the shape of the Z Fold, we all see the same letter, Z, right? It's Z, for sure. Good naming, Samsung. That makes a whole lot of sense. And all that to say that I think Samsung has made some pretty decent hardware here. The materials feel premium. The device doesn't feel too cheap with the hinge. It feels very rigid, and it's able to hold on its own when you want to use it in laptop mode or whatever for some reason. Want to watch YouTube videos with giant black bars on the side, you can do that. The build quality of it feels nice, and it is absolutely riddled with cameras, which is awesome. 3 cameras on the back, 1 camera on the inside, and then another camera on the front. So Surface Duo, 1 camera, Galaxy Z Fold 2, 5 cameras to choose from. And the cameras aren't amazing, I should also preface that. They're not like the same flagship kind of cameras you would see on something like the S20. I know they say they're the same cameras as the Note 20, but just compression-wise, and especially with the telephoto, I noticed them just not being quite as crisp as something you would get out of a Pixel or an iPhone. But still, fairly good cameras nonetheless. I'm not saying they're bad, they're just not, top tier, and this is a $2,000 product, but thankfully on the interior display we actually have 120 hertz, and it looks so smooth, it looks so buttery. I love using the internal display. The full-size keyboard is nice. Using it in the folded up position, I cannot find a lot of use cases for. I get that this is just for immediate use, you just want to check a notification real quick or do some light scrolling, but as soon as the keyboard pops up in this configuration, it drives me nuts. I cannot stand typing on a keyboard that incredibly narrow that pretty much you can use this display for things that don't involve typing, okay? And even then, it's very smushed. The text doesn't look very good. It's only 60 hertz on the outside, so can't really say this is an enjoyable experience, especially considering you're basically holding 2 phones because of how thick and clunky it is, and the hinge also is very lopsided when using it in this configuration, but I barely used it in folded up mode, to be honest. I was always unfolding this thing and using the interior display, which is great. Very rich colors, a very bright display, and also apps did not crash on me. Happy to say that the Snapdragon 865 has been somewhat reliable. Apps open quick, I can take pictures and videos very quickly, and games run fairly decently, and it comes with 256 gigs of storage by default, which is awesome. And also the speakers on this thing are really impressive as well. When watching YouTube videos, I could get quite a whole lot of sound out of this thing, which you should obviously expect from a product of this price point. Of course, 5G modems, if you care about that type of thing. The biometrics were a little little clunky. I mean, I think fingerprint reader built into the power button is all right. You know, it's kind of awkward when the phone is kind of like two phones taped together on the side, so you kind of have to feel for it a little bit differently than a typical Touch ID power button where you don't have many sides of steel to compete with, whereas this one you kind of find the right spot. And obviously I would much rather have in-display Touch ID, or Face ID would be much more reliable and faster, but it gets the job done. It's pretty fast and responsive, which I appreciate. And the camera bump on the back is a little clunky, so you're gonna get a lot of wobbling if you drop this thing on a desk. And it does support wireless charging, but of course when you're using this thing unfolded, it's kind of awkward to try to charge that wirelessly, though you can do it. Obviously, I think you're meant to wirelessly charge it when it's folded up, which I did do quite a bit. Though I must say that the glass they chose for a lot of the Z Fold 2 is very, very fingerprinty, and I noticed it a lot on the back. I just cleaned this thing like a couple minutes ago, and it's already collected all the oils and fingerprints off of my hand, and you kind of notice the same thing with the internal display. And this is where I start to get into some of my drawbacks. Obviously, when you're buying such a innovative and next generation product like the Z Fold 2, you're gonna have to deal with some compromises. And the glass thing on the back, I feel like they could have fixed. You know, they could have made this a matte finish so it doesn't collect fingerprints as much. But with the internal display, I mean, if you want to make a foldable like this, there's really not too much you can do in the first place. So having this plastic display that is, again, covered with a screen protector that Samsung asks you not to remove. Some YouTubers online had decided to remove it for themselves, but I don't trust myself and I don't want Samsung getting mad at me. So if the company is telling you not to remove it, then I take their word for it, and I have not removed the screen protector. But the truth is, that's how Samsung expects you to use the product, and because of that, it's actually pretty hard to clean. You can't exactly just wipe it off like a glass phone and get back to, you know, near perfect conditions, whereas this, even if I wipe it off, you're still gonna get a lot of smudges and a lot of spots, and it's very hard to ignore. And the plasticky feel of that screen protector is kind of sticky compared to what you would experience with most tablets. And of course, the crease I notice quite a bit when scrolling or doing things that involve swiping across the display. It's just kind of a inconsistency you're not really used to seeing that much, and definitely not something you experience when using an iPad or an iPhone. So that's just something else you have to put up with when you take the portability factor into account, which I must say is something that I probably underrated in previous videos. Once I started using this glorious 120 Hz display folded out and in split screen multitasking, I started thinking to myself, okay, this is kind of nice. I could kind of get used to this. And the fact that I can fold it up and fit it in my pocket, all right, I get the use case. I get why so many people were excited about this thing, and I apologize in the past for acting like that wasn't that big of a deal, because after using it for a while now, I can say it is kind of nice being able to split screen apps like that. And before you all think that I'm no longer an Apple sheep or that I'm absolutely in love with the Z Fold 2, there is still a lot of problems here, and there's a certain reason I still don't necessarily believe that foldables are the future, but I do think that they will be a part of it. I think they will be a subsection of the market, a small niche, a sector that likely Samsung will continue to dominate, similar to the Note series, but that's probably a good example of how the Z Fold will age in time. You know, most of the best-selling phones globally do not have a stylus built into them, but year after year after year, Samsung keeps releasing a version of the Galaxy Note series, sometimes more than one, because there are certain people out there that like to have a stylus with their phone for either taking notes or drawing on a smartphone display. I don't really get it, and as we've seen with the rest of the market, it's not that common of a thing. It's kind of just a uniquely Samsung thing. At least Samsung is the only company that can do it in a somewhat popular way, but still, the Note series in sales is much, much lower compared to the rest of the smartphone industry, and personally, I feel like that's what foldables might become. They're gonna be a sector of the market that sticks around for people who do care about having a tablet display that they can fold up when they're done and put in their pocket. And certain people, I think, are always going to love that and always want to flock to that, but I don't think it's the average everyday consumer. I think it's the tech enthusiast. I think it's the YouTuber. I think it's the type of person that collects smartphones year after year and are willing to pay and put up with the compromises and also put up with the higher price tag, because let's be honest, long-term future, this could change if foldable prices get a little bit better, but as the Z Fold 2 currently stands, I cannot recommend any of you buy it. It's really fun as a tech journalist that Samsung is able to release these beta prototype designs and sell it to people so that we can enjoy it and play around with it, but but it's clearly something that's not been ironed out entirely, and it's clearly something that software developers for sure have a hard time understanding, because I've been using lots of third-party apps on the Z Fold 2, and they are so obviously designed to be running on a smartphone that once you blow them up to an aspect ratio like this, it just, you can tell it's not really working very well. Either the app just straight up won't support the entire display at all, or you're only able to see one tweet or one video at a time. It's not running really on a tablet-like display, despite Samsung constantly advertising it's a tablet and it's a phone at the same time. Software, I would say, is the biggest drawback to the Z Fold 2. There are some hardware choices that I find questionable, especially the aspect ratios, because no one would buy a $1,000 phone that was, you know, this thick and this tall with these specs. You wouldn't spend $1,000 on a phone if it was just like this, and you also wouldn't spend $1,000 on a tablet that was made of plastic with a crease that was only this big, and sure, it had 120 hertz, but it's kind of a small tablet to charge $1,000 for. So sadly, yeah, just because you take two products that no one would have interest in and combine them into one, that doesn't necessarily make it worth it. You know, two wrongs don't make a right. And sadly, we do have to compare this foldable to other two products you could buy. And no, you can't combine them and they might not be as pocketable, but the fact is the software here and the way third parties and Android especially handles tablet displays does not justify the portability and the extra cost. So you could buy, you know, iPad Air 4 and an iPhone 12 and probably spend less money and get a way better hardware experience, plus get way more years of software support. And iPadOS is just so many miles ahead of Android when it comes to tablet optimization. And I'm not just talking about what Apple does, I'm also talking about how third parties are able to optimize their apps to run on iPad displays. And that's why I think it would be so interesting if Apple were to make a device like this. Yeah, you can make all your memes now. Drew would love it if Apple made it. Yeah, I would. You know why? Because Apple's a company that actually knows how to handle tablet displays. There's a reason Samsung tablet sales are not that good, and there's a reason that iPad is kind of dominating the tablet market. It's because Apple gets how to write tablet software, and they know how to make developers optimize for their aspect ratios, which Samsung doesn't, and they know how to get the iPadOS App Store really, really rich with solid productivity apps and optimized ones that Samsung just can't rival. So yeah, for software reasons, I would love to see Apple attempt a device like this. Personally, I don't think they will. If you're asking me just from a prediction standpoint, Apple is the type of company to see the compromises here, like the plastic display and the crease and how thick and chunk it is and how expensive it is, and just say, you know what, this technology seems premature and we can't really make a compelling product that we're proud to put our name on. So simply from the fact that, you know, you can press your fingernail on this display and permanently damage it, I think that will steer Apple away from seeing it as worth it. I know they have prototypes. I'm not doubting that. I know they have patents for foldable phones or foldable iPads and that kind of thing. There's all kinds of moonshot projects internally at Apple. I totally get that. But that does not necessarily mean it's coming out. You know, 80% of the patents we see from Apple don't actually end up coming out into real products. And I have no doubt in my mind that somewhere deep in Cupertino they have some foldable iPhone that they're experimenting with. Doesn't surprise me at all. I'm sure Apple works on all kinds of weird products like that. But I do, however, doubt they will actually make something that they see as worth it and compelling to actually release to the market, because Apple is the type of company to skip out on market trends, like displays curving over the side of a phone, or touchscreen laptops, or adding NFC or wireless charging when the rest of the industry had already done it. Apple is the type of company to skip out and say no on certain market trends, and this absolutely seems like one of those trends Apple would just say, nope, not worth it, we can't make it work in a way that we're proud of. But at the same time, as a tech enthusiast and as someone who had a lot of fun using the Z Fold 2, I think it would be really cool for Apple to make some kind of iPad mini / iPhone 11 Pro Max. If you mix those two products together and have iOS when folded up and iPadOS when unfolded, you'd have a really interesting product there, especially depending on how they price it, and it would have Apple Silicon in it, so it would still be really powerful and probably take great pictures and that kind of thing. But anyway, I'm just dreaming here. But Z Fold 2 in its current state, I mean, there are so many cheaper Android. I mean, just the S20 Fan Edition that came out, that is such a better use of money than something like this. And if you want a tablet experience that you can take around with you, I can't justify the compromises that the Fold 2 makes with its internal display and in the way it handles software. You know, with foldables, you kind of have to pick. Do you want a normal smartphone display or a normal tablet display? But you can't really have both. There's not really a way, at least with one hinge, to make a normal phone when folded and normal foldable tablet when unfolded. So Samsung bizarrely decided to have bizarre phone when folded up and bizarre tablet when unfolded, because this aspect ratio, it's not 4:3, and when you do split screen on it, it mainly works, but it's still kind of crunched together, and I would not even try doing 3 apps at once. I know Samsung says you can do that, but it just looks so clunky. It looks so scrunched together that there's never been a functional use case I've seen of having 3 apps open at once. Maybe 2 and then 1 picture-in-picture. I could kind of get behind that, but frankly, like, the iPad mini is great. I enjoyed using that device, but that's about as small as I'm comfortable getting a tablet display. 7.9 inches is pretty tiny for a 4:3 aspect ratio. Once you start doing split screen and the keyboard comes up, that's when things start feeling a little bit crammed, and this is even less of a display than the iPad mini is. It's even smaller, and that's why things feel very crammed despite having, you know, elongated phone display. And I think that's how Android handles the software for the Z Fold 2 a lot of the time. It's just like, oh, this is a phone that's extra chunk, so I'm gonna stretch out the text this way, and I'm gonna stretch out the display this way. And because the Z Fold 2 is gonna sell in such incredibly small scale, I doubt that a lot of these third-party devs are going to prioritize apps that are not scaling or optimizing very well on this display, especially with the Android Play Store not being as well optimized to run on different hardware, because every Android app has to scale for literally thousands of different phones, so they can't be as specific as the iOS App Store with different iPhone displays, or with iPads as well, because there's only so many different displays they have to optimize for. It's a lot easier for something to feel simple and streamlined, whereas on the Fold 2, man, stuff just has to be blown up, and technically, you know, it does fill the display for a lot of apps, but it's just clearly not designed to work on a display like this, and that's why the experience does not justify the extra $1,000 just because you can fold it up and fit it in your pocket. So I'm sure Samsung is going to keep trying to make it better in time, and my hope is that maybe next year or sometime in the future they can actually make a larger 4:3 aspect ratio that people can optimize a little better for, and then maybe instead of folding it tall so that you have this really, really skinny display on the outside, we can actually fold it the other way and maybe have a short, stocky display, but at least it would be better for one-hand use, because trying to use this thing with one hand is ridiculous. You can't open it with one hand, and even if you don't want to open it, trying to reach things at the top of the display, just like settings and notifications, even that's really difficult to do with one hand. So it just kind of feels awkward in both experiences, even though, again, it's really fun to use, and I think it makes for great demo. If someone goes to a Best Buy and tries one of these things out, they'll get a load of fun out of it, but the fun does wear off after a certain amount of days, and eventually you just want a product to take around with you, and that's why I think most people who buy foldable phones typically have more than one phone. You know, they have a backup, they have something else they can go with if they need to, and this is more of just kind of a collector's piece. As a tech enthusiast and as someone who really is interested in the latest, greatest technology, yeah, this kind of stuff is impressive. But I went to a small gathering recently, don't worry, we were all masked up, and I showed this foldable to 6 or 7 people there, and yeah, I mean, they were somewhat interested for the first couple seconds, but then they pretty much go, wow, okay, that's cool, here, and then they give it back to me. By the way, they were not coming up to me asking about it. You know, no one was like, whoa, what kind of phone is that? No, I had to bring it up in conversation every time. I was like, hey, have you seen one of these? What do you think? What do you think? And pretty much everyone I showed it to was just like, okay. Pretty cool. All right, moving on. They would definitely not drop $2,000 on this, and I don't even think foldables are going to be able to drop their prices that much. Similar to smartphones over the years. They've gotten cheaper and better value, but at the same time, the most popular phones, the ones that are selling the best globally, are still more expensive than they were 10 years ago. And as foldables age and get better and hopefully thinner and become more practical, I still think that the price is going to be somewhat high, because you won't have the same economies of scale that regular smartphones do. And because of that, and how Samsung, you know, keeps pushing Thomas Brown edition, you know, this is going to be more of a luxury segment for the foreseeable future. They could try to get the price down, but it's been 2 years now, and so far, when it comes to this form factor, it's only gotten more expensive. It was $1980 in 2019, and now it's $1999 in 2020. So not exactly sure what they can do to make this device better and improve it, while at the same time dumb down the price without compromising massively on the functionality, like turning off this whole exterior display. thing, which we saw some rumors of a few months back, and I don't think that's a necessarily great idea, but, you know, if Samsung is bored, and I think Samsung is the only company that can actually make displays like this at scale, because they are a display manufacturer, whereas other companies probably can't even afford to do this. Samsung's the only one that can really make it work. So I think that's why Samsung is going to have a market dominance on the foldable thing for a while, and I don't think it's going to replace all of our phones or all of our tablets, but still interesting tech and impressive nonetheless, and I got a real kick out of using it. And while I don't see the fun in keeping it, I highly encourage, if any of you out there have ordered the Z Fold 2 or do want to use this as your daily driver for the next few years, go through the process of trying to return it on Samsung's website, because they will literally give you $100 back just if you ask to return it. You don't have to go through with the return. They'll just give you $100 for saying that you would like to return it, which I've never seen a company do. But the truth is, if Samsung is doing that and they're offering you $100 when you try to return it, it's probably because there's a very, very high return rate on Z Fold 2s. There's a lot of people buying them and playing around with them for a little bit and then sending them back. And I think that's going to be a continuous issue with foldable phones, because they're cool, they're fun, but they're something that most people don't want to keep around as their daily driver. Anyway, hope that was somewhat interesting or informative to some of you. Yes, I've changed my mind in some ways, because before I used to think that foldables were going to die out and Samsung would just flat out stop making them. Now I feel like, no, they're going to be here, they're going to be around, but still though, using a display that's this big that I can fold up and fit in my pocket, that was cool, that was fun. Not $2,000 fun, but still fun. Thank you all for watching. This is your Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.